All right, guys. So I mean, come closer. That's good. And so I first of all, I want to thank Manny and Jim, who are standing behind me. Jim, of course, serves the city of San Diego, and Manny runs the San Diego office here for immigration enforcement. And it's really just unbelievably heartbreaking what you have going on at the American southern border. And they talk about when Title 42 was undone, the Remain in Mexico policy that Kamala Harris destroyed virtually on day one of her administration. You had hundreds of people waiting on the other side of this wall, knowing that Kamala Harris was going to make it easier for them to come into this country illegally. And not just come into this country illegally, but Kamala Harris also wants to give benefits to illegal aliens. The state of California wants to give over $100,000 to illegal immigrants to buy homes at a time when most American citizens cannot afford to buy a home in the city of San Diego. Housing prices are totally unaffordable. I talked with Jim a little bit about the incredible strain on local resources that are happening. You've got millions of dollars of San Diego money going to illegal aliens. That means healthcare services that a lot of American citizens aren't enjoying. That means mental health services that a lot of American citizens can't get. And it's happening because Kamala Harris refuses to do her job. And this is not rocket science. I hear a little heartbreak, honestly, when I talked to Manny earlier about what's going on here. He took an oath to protect this country, to protect it from all enemies, foreign and domestic, and he has to, because Kamala Harris told him to, release illegal aliens into this country with minimal processing and minimal security. It breaks his heart that he's not allowed to do his job. And why is he not allowed to do his job? Because Kamala Harris, she suspended deportations on day one. She ended Donald Trump's Remain in Mexico policy, and she re-implemented the catch and release disaster that allows a lot of illegal aliens to commit fraud on our asylum system. You know what Donald Trump and I want to do? We want to go to war with the Mexican drug cartels. We want to close down the American southern border. We want to reinstitute deportations, and we want to stop the insanity at the southern border. I just want to make one final observation here, something that occurs to me. I mean, look, San Diego, obviously not a red city, California, not a red state, but this is part of our American family. And Kamala Harris, she seems to have this sick idea that American citizens shouldn't benefit from the social compact in this country. Think about what it means to be an American citizen. You pay your taxes, you sign up for the draft, so if God forbid we go to war, you do your duty. And what do you get in exchange for it? You get the benefit of the social safety net in this country, where if you're down on your luck, you don't starve to death, you don't go homeless because you didn't make a mistake, maybe you lost your job. That is the basic social contract. You give a little and you get a little when you're down on your luck. What Kamala Harris seems to want to do is to give all the benefits of American citizenship to people who shouldn't even be here, and that's going to bankrupt this country and make it impossible for normal people to afford to buy a home, to afford to buy groceries, to benefit from that social safety net. Medicare has kept millions of American seniors out of poverty. She wants to give Medicare to illegal aliens, bankrupting that program and throwing a whole generation of our elderly citizens into terrible, terrible destitution. This is what Kamala Harris is doing. And I guess I just have a message for Kamala. Why do you dislike the citizens of your own country so much that you want to give the benefits of citizenship to illegal aliens, and you want American citizens to suffer under your policies? You are the vice president now. You could fix this disaster now. Please do. We can't wait another month for you to get a promotion. You need to do your job now.
Senator Vance, Vice President Kamala Harris has argued or blamed you because the immigration bill didn't pass in the Senate. She wonders why you didn't support it. Yeah. What would be your answer for her?
Well, my answer is the Kamala Harris border bill was not a real border bill. It would not have secured the southern border. We have to remember here that if you go back to that negotiation, what we were really trying to do in the Republican Party is force Kamala Harris as border czar to do her job. We were trying to find ways in that legislation to force her to do her job. Now, nobody disagrees that Kamala Harris could close down the southern border right now if she wanted to. The entire exercise of that bill was, how do we force her to do something that she clearly wasn't going to do? And what we basically realized is there's no way to do it. There is no way to force a vice president who's the border czar or a president to shut down the border if they don't want to. That's what made the border bill such a disaster. But fundamentally, the problem is Kamala Harris. She implemented all of these policies on day one. She said she wanted to open the border. She did exactly that. Oh man, we've got some crazy.
Yeah.
That is
Oh my
a
gosh, it's
crazy
like
ass
stuck
bug.
onto it. Yeah.
Somebody help him. Somebody help him.
There we go. All right, Senator.
That's what we need to keep from coming across the southern border here. We need to build the wall higher because that was a scary ass bug. Sir.
Yeah, Senator, according to CBP data, apprehensions, encounters are at its lowest levels since February 2021. Is that not an example of President Biden's executive orders actually working at the southern border?
Well, so two things here. First of all, their entire argument gives lie because they want to say, well, we started to enforce the border policy and now all of a sudden the numbers have come down a little bit. Well, if that's true, then how can they possibly say they needed this border bill to do their job? They're saying right now we're doing our job, and all that they needed was for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to actually take some executive action. That's been our entire argument the whole time, is that Kamala Harris could enforce the border if she wanted to. Now, unfortunately, the argument that they're making doesn't actually make sense because while border crossings at the southern border have come down, all they've done is redirect them to the ports of entry into airports. So if you look at the total number of crossings, both coming in through the southern border, but also coming in through airports and other ports of entry, the numbers haven't come down at all. It's all kabuki theater. They're shifting numbers from the southern border to our ports of entry to try to tell the American people the numbers have come down. In reality, the numbers are as bad as they were at the beginning of her administration.
I actually wanted to ask you about the recent increase in border crossings in this region specifically, moving west from Arizona. You were down at Sierra Vista last month. Can you tell me a little bit about what that means? This is a more developed area, more hardened, bigger, more extensive border security.
Well, I think one of the things that it shows, unfortunately, is that when you roll out the red carpet and give illegal aliens a ton of health care benefits, a ton of housing benefits, you're going to induce more people to come. Look, California has made a catastrophic error at the state level, of course, backed by a lot of the San Francisco liberal policies that Kamala Harris has supported, that we want to give illegal aliens free mortgages. We want to give illegal aliens really generous health care benefits, and that has induced a lot of illegal aliens to come into the state of California. But again, we want America to work for American citizens. We want people who deserve to be here, who have the right to be here, to benefit from the social safety net. If you give it to people who shouldn't even be here in the first place, you're going to bankrupt those programs and destroy the basic foundation of our social cohesion as a country.
Sir, would a second Trump administration reinstate its policy of separating families who cross the southern border illegally?
Well, look, we have to. Let me sort of reject the premise a little bit, okay? Because when the media says family separation, look, every time that somebody's arrested for a crime, that's family separation. If a guy commits gun violence and is taken to prison, that's family separation, which of course is tragic for the children, but you've got to prosecute criminals and you have to enforce the law. And under Kamala Harris's policies, we have over 300,000 children who are missing, many of whom have been trafficked or even sex trafficked by the Mexican drug cartels. The real family separation policy is when you don't enforce the border like Kamala Harris has refused to do, then you lead to hundreds of thousands of missing children. God forbid. I mean, I have 3 little kids myself. I don't even want to think what has happened to those kids who have been trafficked by the Mexican drug cartels. It's happening because Kamala Harris has refused to do her job. And for her to say that Donald Trump wants family separation when what he really wants is law enforcement, he wants to empower these. That's what we have to do, or we're going to have family and child suffering on a mass scale, just like we've had under the last 3.5 years of Kamala Harris's leadership.
Do you support the?
This is obviously your second trip in as many months to the southern border, but the northern border is a massive issue, something that they've been screaming about. They're seeing record numbers of encounters. They're seeing people from Ireland evade and come in. They're seeing issues from across the board. There's not a lot of focus. No border wall up there.
Sure.
What is the plan under the Trump administration, should you win, to kind of address the issues at the north?
Well, I think that in a lot of ways we have to use our diplomatic partners, of course. They're coming through the north, meaning they're coming through Canada, and the Canadians, I think, could do a lot more to stop that. You're right that it has gotten worse, but still 95% of the border problem in this country is at the southern border and also through those ports of entry. That is something we just have to fix from better leadership. And Kamala Harris, unfortunately, not only does she's shown a lack of interest in border security, she's shown an active interest in opening of the southern border and forcing Americans to suffer the consequences because of it. So yeah, we're going to have to do some more on the northern border, but we still have to keep our focus on the southern border because that's where most of the problem is coming in.
Really quick follow-up.
Please.
Is there a plan to put a structure up there? There isn't one right now. There never has been. Would there be a plan to put some kind of structure in the between the U.S. and Canada?
There's not a plan right now, and I haven't talked to the president about it, but if you look at the numbers coming in across the northern border right now, I think that working with our Canadian partners, we can solve the majority of that problem. Again, you just have to have a president who's willing to do the work of border security, and Kamala Harris is not interested in doing it.
Senator, do you support authorizing the use of deadly force for migrants crossing the border illegally, and in what circumstances? For instance, DeSantis supported it if people are carrying drugs across the border or cutting through the border wall. What's your take on that?
Well, you're talking about authorizing deadly force for everybody? Well, of course not, right? But I mean, look, obviously if you have a violent criminal, if you have a person who's carrying a firearm, if you have somebody who's bringing in loads of fentanyl, you have to do everything that you can to prevent them from coming into our country. Obviously, we have parameters around the use of deadly force in law enforcement. I don't think that we need to change those. What we need to change is Kamala Harris's failed leadership that doesn't let these guys do their job. I mean, it's tough to overstate, and this is one of the reasons why I really wish Kamala Harris, if she'd come to the southern border and talk to these guys, is there is a real sense, not just of frustration, but of heartache. These guys are doing this job because they love this country and they want to protect it. They have a vice president who's telling them, you're not allowed to do their job. We have got to fix that. And I think, frankly, if she looked these guys in the eyes and understood how dedicated they are to doing their jobs, she might actually let them. So I'd encourage her to come here before the election.
As you speak with the union.
Just two questions. One, on the border, have you been seeking input from your Senate colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans, particularly those who are senators of border states, about the policies you're formulating if you guys do win in November? And the second question is, do you support the idea, recently the school shooting in Georgia, the father of the kid who did it was charged in the situation. Do you think it's right to hold parents accountable for the accessibility their kids might have to guns?
Well, look, on the Georgia situation, again, we have to this is just a few days old, and I think it's important to say our hearts go out to all the families affected by it. Just an unbelievable tragedy at the beginning of the school year, and we just, we wish as much counseling and as much sympathy and just as much healing as is possible in this situation. I just can't even imagine what these families are going through. And look, I think you let Georgia law enforcement figure out what makes the most sense. I mean, obviously, in some cases, it's going to make sense to charge the parents. In some cases, it's not going to make sense. But it depends on the details here. And I trust Georgia law enforcement to make the right decisions here. So I defer to them. I don't know every detail of this case, obviously. I don't know what they're seeing. They've got a lot of investigative materials that are not open to the public. I think we ought to trust law enforcement to do their job, and frankly, here at the southern border, we ought to trust these law enforcement to do their job too. Your second question was about talking to some of the border state senators. Yeah. I mean, look, it's funny, of course, because he was potentially talking about being tapped as VP. I get along well with Mark Kelly. Obviously, John Cornyn and Ted Cruz represent one of the most important border states in our country. So yeah, we talk to a lot of our Senate colleagues and a lot of our a lot of our friends, but most we try to talk to people who are here on the ground actually dealing with the consequences. I think it's important, of course, to get a diversity of perspectives, but certainly Donald Trump and I talk to a lot of people and we're trying to understand this border crisis.
Senator, I have questions for you on drugs and fentanyl.
Sure.
The first one, during the Trump administration, the first year of his term, fentanyl deaths were less than 20,000. By the end of his first term, it was over 50,000. And then I'm curious, as you've been talking with law enforcement, if you've learned any lessons, if they've told you like something that's wasn't done in the Trump administration first term that they should do in the second term. And then my second question, you were at church the other day, you were talking about compassion for drug users. Yep. And I'm curious if you see that in any policies. Do you think that people shouldn't be charged for using, or Good Samaritan laws? What kind of like policy would you like to see around that?
Yeah, so let me try to take the first question first. I mean, look, you did see towards the end of the Trump administration fentanyl deaths starting to come down, drug overdose deaths starting to come down. Yes, there was a spike at the very beginning, but this is what leadership is when you see a problem, you try to address it. The problem with Kamala Harris is we've seen this spike. She hasn't done anything to address it. In fact, I think there's a good argument that she's made it worse. On compassion for drug users, I think we have to remember that, look, drug users are human beings, and they're human beings with a lot to give if they can get clean and actually get things in order. And so I do think that we have to do better on treatment. We have to do better on giving people the access to sort of detox, because any treatment pathway, it starts with 48 hours, 72 hours of detox, and then it hopefully goes to a longer-term treatment option from there. We were really, really suffering on the early detox side of this, and I think we could do a lot better on ensuring the longer-term treatment options too. I think we have to empower a lot of nonprofit organizations, a lot of church groups and so forth to do the on-the-ground work to help drug addicts get into the path of recovery, but also stay on the path of recovery. And I think finally, we have to stop the bleeding. The thing that kills second chances is when fentanyl comes into these communities. You have, a 22-year-old girl who relapses. I see this story in Ohio all the time. She's been clean for 2 years. She relapses, and that's it. She never gets another opportunity at a second chance. If you have 70,000 Americans dying of fentanyl overdoses every single year, that is the main thing that you have to stop. You have to give people the second chance before they can take advantage of it.
Senator, when you talk to the union,
questions for you.
Yeah.
So first I was...
Sorry, I just want to make sure everybody gets a question.
Yeah, first I wanted you to clarify something we said in our interview yesterday. Are you still planning on being on stage with Tucker Carlson later this month? And then related to the border, what's the Trump-Vance plan to stop social media being used for cartel recruitment?
Yeah, very, very good question. So on the first question, yes. Look, I believe, agree or disagree with anything that Tucker Carlson or his guests say, we believe in free speech. We believe if you don't like an idea, and obviously, the Holocaust was a terrible tragedy, and it's something that we have to make sure never gets repeated again in this country. The best way, I think, to ensure, never gets repeated again anywhere in the world, certainly in this country or anywhere else, the best way to ensure that doesn't happen is to debate and push back against bad ideas. It's not to try to censor and suppress them. I really believe that the more you censor ideas instead of fight back against them, the more you give those ideas power. On the second question, it was, sorry, remind me?
Using social media for cartel.
Yeah. So look, damn thing. So the thing on social media is, look, these companies are making billions of dollars, and a lot of them are getting rich by actually facilitating some really, really bad stuff. And we have to stop that. Right? And if you're not willing to use the power of law enforcement to tell these social media companies they have to stop facilitating drug trafficking and sex trafficking, then you're not fit to be a leader of this country. We certainly believe that if the Department of Justice applied appropriate pressure on these social media companies, they could behave a lot better. And if they don't, there's going to be hell to pay. It is ridiculous that you have American businesses facilitating drug trafficking and sex trafficking. It's making these guys' lives harder. We're going to make their lives easier when Donald Trump is president.
Senator, when you talk to the Border Patrol Union, what are the topics what is the top of the list of the things that they would like to see when the Trump administration get back into the White House?
Just one, they want to be empowered to do their job, right? They don't want, when somebody comes across the border illegally, I think they'd like to be able to send them back instead of have to processing them and then send them back into the country. They give them an ID, they find these IDs ripped up a couple miles away. They know that a lot of these guys are criminals. They know that a lot of them have connections to gangs. They just want to be able to enforce the law. Now, there are a few things, of course, on top of that, a few policy changes, some executive orders I talked about with Manny earlier about this. Number one, re-implement Title 42. The Remain in Mexico policy, it really worked. Number two, re-implement deportations. You've got to be willing to send people back who come across that border illegally. And number three, end the asylum fraud. The basic problem, or one of the most fundamental problems, I should say, with our immigration system is Kamala Harris lets people come into this country, claim asylum, and then disappear for 10 or 12 years awaiting a court date. You've got to say, wait in Mexico while we adjudicate your asylum claim. You don't get to come into this country, collect free health care benefits and free housing on American taxpayers' dime, which is what they're doing thanks to Kamala Harris's policies. Anybody else who hasn't asked a question yet? Okay, we'll do one more for the New York Times since the giant hornet thing attacked him.
Thank you so much. As a follow-up on the Tucker Carlson question, you mentioned that we should push back on bad ideas and freedom of speech. Tucker Carlson had a speaking slot at the RNC. He's a very influential figure among conservatives. I mean, do you think that he should be interviewing those kind of people, months before the election? Is that a distraction? Is that causing problems for your campaign?
Well, look, Tucker Carlson isn't affiliated with the campaign, so I don't think that what Tucker Carlson does is a distraction or is not. He's going to do what he wants to do, and we can disagree or agree with the viewpoints offered by his host. But again, I think the fundamental idea here is Republicans believe not in censorship. We believe in free speech and debate. It's one of the most important things that RFK said in his message endorsing Donald Trump is that Democrats used to be the party where if you had an idea you didn't like, you pushed back against it, you fought back against it, you criticized it. This whole idea that has taken hold in the far left of this country, that if you see a bad idea, the way to solve it is to censor it, I think is ridiculous. Kamala Harris is the candidate of censorship. She's the candidate of using big tech to silence Americans. She's the candidate of shutting Americans up. Donald Trump is the candidate of letting us have the debate because he believes in the American people enough to know that if we have a real debate, wisdom is ultimately going to win out. That's the Donald Trump approach. It's anti-censorship, and I'm proud to stand with him on it. Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Press.